Welcome to the RhiannonO podcast. My name is Rhiannon. I'm a knitter, knitting instructor, knitwear designer, and occasional other types of fiber arts artist living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with my wife and cat. Sometimes it's hard to get through that introduction, but I want to start each episode by introducing myself because I think it's just a good way to start. Yeah, that was a really awkward intro. Anyways, hi, it's the first time I'm sitting down to record in 2023, so welcome. I hope you have your knitting with you and a beverage, and you are ready to talk about what I'm up to. So thank you for being here. I appreciate so much that you're here. I mentioned last time that my goal for 2023 is that I would get back to an every 2 weeks podcast schedule. Now, this is something I do just as a hobby, so this isn't like a job that needs to be a routine. But I do find that when I record every 2 weeks, I have less content. I can spend more time on each project. I can show you more in less time, if that makes sense. So I don't want to ramble on and on, which of course I am already doing. So let's dive right in. What I'm wearing is the Solverve shawl by Scandier Knits. I knit this with Jamieson & Smith 2-ply jumper weight, and I cannot remember the name of the color, but it was something like medium purple. That line of yarn uses numbers sometimes for colors, and they may be labeled with a color, the name of a colorway as well, but generally speaking, they just give you a number. I don't know the number offhand, and this is something I knit way at the beginning of last year, so just thought I would share with you what I'm wearing, but not going to go into too much detail. I am holding it in place. I don't usually wear it like this, but right now it's not like I need a scarf outside, which is how I normally wear it. I'm holding it in place with this vintage silver pin that I got at an antique store here called River West Antiques, and this is sterling silver. It was made in Mexico in the 1950s or something like that, and I just thought it was so perfect and sweet and like the perfect accessory. I have really got into antiques in the last year, just since being in the Midwest. The antiques here are amazing, and also kind of into some more like vintage stuff. Let's talk about my finished objects and near finished objects, because they will be finished objects by the end of the week and you won't ever see them again. So let's get into it. The first is I knit the Father Cables hat by Veronica Job. This, if you have been around here, you know I have knit 3 of these now. This is a class that I have taught as an intro to cables, and you might be thinking, why would you do something so complicated as an intro to cables? And it's because I want people to know that it's not hard and they can do it. So this pattern, I'm trying to get good light on it because I chose to do it in a really dark color this time. It just has a lot of really intricate seaming cables. It's got a moss stitch background. It's got cables all the way up into the crown, beautiful crown decreases. There are 2 size options, and then there's also, if you want to make a slouchy version, there's a slightly different chart, it's a different chart for that. So there's an elongated version for slouch on either size. So really there are 4 charts total, and you are only working with charts. It's like you cast on, you do the brim, and then it's just charted from there on out. So I won't put it on, well, maybe I will. Anyways, I absolutely love this hat. I have found that it is the best fitting hat that this and the Kukul Can by M to the Third Yarn Co., which is a hat pattern that was released along with like a particular line of yarn that they carry. So those are the 2 hat patterns that I feel like they fit just right. I always get a good result, so I love this one. I don't know if I'm gonna keep knitting it forever because I have 2 that are in really good shape right now, and I've knit them both with the same kind of yarn. So I might start looking at other things, but I know that if other things don't pan out, I can always come back to this one. So real quick about the yarn, I have that much left of the cake, if that tells you anything. So it is a one skein project. Even though, you know, cables do chew up more yarn than like stockinette. This is Cumbria by the Fiber Company. It is a luxurious blend of Masham wool, merino, and mohair. So there's mohair in it, and it's not like very, you can tell it's not very halo-y. It does get good stitch definition, you know, despite being a very dark yarn. I think you can really see all the textures that are happening there. So it is the color Derwent Water. So it's a worsted weight yarn. You get 236 yards in a skein, which I think is a good, feels like a good deal in worsted weight. So, and it's 90% wool, 10% mohair. So it doesn't tell you how much of that wool is mohair or Masham. And if you can hear a smacking noise in the background, this is becoming a routine. Every time I sit down to record, my cat decides that it's time for a snack. So her food dish is right over there. She's eating wet food. She's making a lot of mouth noises, and I'm sorry. It's just what she does. She hears me talking and she says, it's time to eat. Hi, Miso. Hi. All right, so the next finished object is I finished my 3x1 rib socks. So these are knit with a Nora George yarn that was in my stash. I had bought it at a de-stash sale a long time ago. And I actually ended up pairing it with an Emma's yarn mini that was in this wonderful orange color because I felt like it needed just a little more, just a little something, you know, a little contrast with it. Yeah, I had started knitting another pair of socks with this yarn, and then that was my lesson learned on lace socks. I don't like lace socks for me. I will snag the eyelets on something and destroy them, and it just felt like that pattern wasn't working out with this yarn. So I knit these. I followed the pattern called Morning Coffee Socks, but I didn't read all the instructions, so I ended up just doing 3x1 rib, when in fact there's like one line of 3x1 rib, and then there are other, like the repeat, actually there's other things that happen in subsequent rows to make a different texture, and I wasn't paying attention. I just went, okay, great, 3x1 rib, read the first row, I got it now. But mostly I follow a sock pattern for, you know, details like this has you do a twisted rib cuff. It's a slip stitch heel, which I have figured out is pretty much my favorite heel because something magic happens and it just makes it really like dense and sturdy feeling. Yeah, and it's heel flap and gusset, and then toe decreases. I never remember exactly how to do them. I also never remember how to do a heel turn, or that I need to do a heel turn before I launch into a gusset. So following a pattern helps me with that. I will be knitting this pattern again, and I think I will possibly be doing more 3x1 socks in DK weight soon, or worsted weight. But yeah, that is a second finished object. I have one more quasi-finished object. I am finishing the toe on this sock. It's a self-striping or self-patterning yarn. I don't know what it is. And I have finished its mate, but I'm going to actually take out the toe and redo it. So this sock I hadn't ever showed you before because it was a surprise gift knit. You see this white portion in here. This is where it went from being the work of one knitter to the work of another. So I just demarcated that with some white yarn. This is a pair of socks for my spouse. Their grandmother knit this upper portion at some point in her life. We don't know when that happened. but she had begun on the heel. So even though this line looks like a weird jog, it is actually all, I finished the heel, did the heel turn, and that is where you go back and you pick up those front stitches when you start working the gusset. So that is actually a straight line across, if that makes sense. But yeah, so I thought, you know, there's this there's this piece of a sock that is knitted by someone who is no longer with us, who is really precious, and who my wife was really close to. And I thought I would just pick it up and finish it and make her a pair of socks. So I am doing that. I knit the toe with the typical rounded toe that I do for myself. And then after a try on, so this was meant to be a Christmas gift. I didn't think to do this until way too late to finish it for Christmas, because it was literally, there was half a sock already knit. So I had to do 1.5 socks, and I had like a week. We had a blizzard. I didn't have time to go Christmas shopping. It's a whole thing. But essentially, there's, you know, a pretty standard way to knit the toe of a sock. And it's just that you decrease, you know, you're knitting this tube, and then you decrease on both sides, and then make a, you know, kind of a rounded, here, I'm making the shape. This is the shape. It's rounded like this. However, depending on how your toes are, you may find that like your pinky toe is a lot shorter than your big toe. So your foot, you may actually need to make a slope like this. I think this is a good illustration. Yeah. So instead of a perfectly flat slope, right, you want it longer on the big toe side. So that's what I'm doing, because it just didn't fit quite right. And the socks I stuck with, obviously, however many stitches were on the needles is however many this sock would be. So it's only 52 stitches. Now I usually do 56 for myself and for my spouse. Our feet are not, I don't think our feet are especially skinny, but I think it's an issue with my gauge, and also we both like a really, really snug sock. So having 52 stitches, which is 4 stitches less than usual, just made a little more negative ease, making the sock tighter, which means that it's stretching more this way when it goes on, which means that it's not stretching that way as much. So the foot of the sock has to be kind of longer than usual, and the toe especially needs to be longer than usual. So I hope that that technical stuff is helpful to you, just to understand. So what I'm doing on the second sock, and what I will go back and redo on the first sock, is decrease on one side only. So there will be a left sock and a right sock, but by decreasing on one side only initially, you're knitting that tube, and you're starting to create that slope that's going to go up, and then you start to decrease for the toe, and you get this, you get an asymmetrical slope. So yeah, that is basically the other thing that is about to be done. So whew, got through some stuff. So I have been finishing up a lot of little things I had on the needles, putting others aside. I'm going to be storing some projects that are not part of my near future plans, and just storing them away until I feel like dealing with them. But I have cast on 2 new projects that I want to share with you. The first one is a sweater by Tomomi Yoshimoto that you've probably seen, you've probably heard of. It's the drawing sweater. It looks like, well, I'll put a picture in. It is a beautiful top-down raglan, surprisingly. I didn't know that just from looking at it, and then I looked closer. It is a raglan. It has color work on the yoke, which is why I say it's a surprise. It's a raglan. I would expect a, you know, traditional yoke shaping where you're just increasing, but the designer chose to do that instead. And it has short rows in the back. It currently only comes in 2 sizes because of the nature of the chart. So the chart is just really a drawing that has been converted into a knitting chart, which anyone can do, right? Like you can draw any shape and then put it over a piece of graph paper and figure out how you would knit that. The only thing to know is that the ratio of knit stitches is not, you know, a perfect square. So they're going to be usually wider than they are tall. So if you have like a 4:5 ratio, that's probably good. They make knitter's graph paper for this. So yeah, so the current sizing, there are 2 sizes. They're not very different from each other. And the color work does not have regular repeats. It's not like you do 5 stitches of color A and then 2 stitches of color B and repeat that to the end of the row. Every single row, there's going to be just like different stuff happening, and it's going to be very inconsistent. So you might be doing like 3 of one color and then 2 of one and then 1 of one and then 2 of one and then 3 of one and then 5 of one and then 0, you know, like just around and around. So I don't know why I said 0 at the end. That doesn't even make sense. So these are the colors I'm using. The neck starts in one color, and then that color becomes the flowers that are kind of fluttering down. Now, I had a real struggle choosing colors, but in the end, I just let my friend Nicole I was like, here are some options, pick one. She picked this one. So it will be gray flowers, but it's a very light gray, almost white. And then the sweater has immediately, I guess there are 2 kind of like main colors, because this is considered the contrast color. But the first is darker, or, you know, just something with more contrast, really. And then the bottom will be all of this. So these are my colors. I am knitting this with Woolstock by Blue Sky Fibers. And I believe I have the colors Gray Harbor, Loon Lake, and Spring Ice. So I'll show you those again. This is Gray Harbor. This is Loon Lake. And this is Spring Ice. So all I have so far is the first 20 rounds, which is what everyone says is the hardest part of the sweater. So you cast on and you work your ribbing, and then you're doing short rows, you're doing color work, you're doing a lot of float management, because as you can see on some of these early rounds, there's almost no contrast color, right? So doing all of that together is kind of challenging, not gonna lie, but it's a wonderful effect. And so here's the floats on the inside. You see a lot of blue. It is pretty messy looking because of just how inconsistent it is. And there are areas that I'm thinking if it doesn't floof up in blocking, I may duplicate stitch over the contrast color, the gray, which I don't mind because I see it as a teachable moment. So I'm teaching a class on this pattern, and I wanted to teach this pattern mostly because my whole thing, my whole shtick, and what I love to do as a teacher is to get people to do something that they think is really hard and that they think is going to be too hard for them, and then just sort of walk them through like, well, here are the choices you can make. Here's how, you know, you can stick directly to the pattern, knit it at the gauge with the, you know, recommended yarn, recommended needle size, or, you know, whatever you get to get gauged. Like, you could do a completely following instructions version of it and get the size that it says it's going to be. But you can also do other things. Like the designer suggests, if you want more sizes, like try knitting it at another gauge. And so, you know, there's only so far you can get with the same weight of yarn at a different gauge, but you could switch up weights of yarn. So I'm doing mine in worsted weight. My gauge is 20 stitches per inch instead of 21, which is the gauge that's in the pattern, which just means I'm going to get a little more ease in the garment. It's going to end up just a little bit bigger. It's not going to be hugely different, but over, you know, over hundreds of stitches, that difference of 1 stitch every 4 inches will make it, I will have multiple inches of difference is what I'm saying. So I'm actually knitting the smaller size, or I'm following the instructions for the smaller size, and doing it at my own gauge. And I think I'm going to assess when I get to the waist if I want to do waist shaping. So that's another thing you can do as an option when you're working from a pattern that doesn't have waist shaping. You can always put that in. I may split for the sleeves at a different point. So I would be, you know, of course, showing students, here's how you would do that. And I may make the sweater longer. I may make the sleeves shorter. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of take control of a pattern and make it exactly what you want. If you're just like me and you're like, okay, well, I love this design in the yoke and I want the challenge, but you know, I have this one hang up about the size or whatever. So I'm really encouraging people to approach this class, if they, you know, take it with playfulness, with a sense of it's just knitting, right? I can always frog it. I can always start over. Like I can always fix it. And also if there are things that are turning out that are not exactly how you want, like for me, the float management in the beginning is very challenging. I may need to duplicate stitch or, you know, do something to kind of fill in some of that. Then I want to show them, you know, here's how you would fix it. But also, you know, like give them tips on like how to avoid, you know, catching your float in the same place every time. For instance, helps you avoid seeing the floats through. So there might be some areas where I kind of purposely make a mistake, just a little mistake to demonstrate something. And I am purposely changing the gauge and the weight of the yarn because I want to show how that's possible. So like I might be making modifications that I wouldn't otherwise make just because it's a teachable moment, is what I'm saying. So I'm very excited to be knitting that. Again, the designer is Tomomi Yoshimoto. She has some beautiful designs. I'm super in love with the broccoli sweater as well. And I think it might just end up being something I have to make someday. And if you wanted to follow her on Instagram, she is shima428. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing I'm knitting is finally, I'm knitting the Woodlands pullover by Tif Neilan. This is a project that my wife saw when we went to Tolt Yarn and Fiber in Tolt, Washington, and was like, I really like this sweater. Can I have it? And it was like the first time I think that there was a specific request like that. So pretty cool. So I have just cast on and started knitting it. It is really rolling up because it's stockinette, knit flat. But you can see there is one band of color. So let's go through the pattern details. So this is Woodlands Pullover by Tif Neilan. You can follow her at tifneilan._handknits on Instagram. I'll put this in the show notes. And I'm actually doing this just in the recommended yarn and colors. I was unable to get the gauge on this, by which I mean I swatched with two needle sizes, a US 6 and a US 5. So US 6 is the one that the designer used to get the gauge. And my gauge is just a little looser. I don't know why, it just is. So I went down one size from what I would otherwise have done, which is actually going to turn out beautifully because the person I'm knitting for is kind of between the sizes and does not like, you know, I went and measured a bunch of their sweaters that they wear, and they don't usually wear really huge oversized things. And so I was kind of worried about how it would turn out to knit something that's really oversized. If my gauge is too loose, it's going to be even bigger. So I had actually started knitting size 3, had to frog it and start over. But I had only got about this far anyway. So hey, that was a day's work or whatever. So I'm knitting size 2 now. And I'm using the recommended yarn, which is the Vovo by Rosa Pomar. It is a kind of sport to DK weight, I guess. Sometimes things say they are one weight and I disagree based on how they knit up. So my issue with the gauge on this one is that I could have kept going down a needle size, but it was already feeling like the combination, like with the needles, and I'm using metal needles, so very smooth, sharp tips. Getting it, there's a point where I think if your gauge is tighter with a certain yarn, it becomes uncomfortable to knit. And I think you probably have knit something like that, where it's just, you're like, this is kind of uncomfortable, I don't like it. And it's not that I wouldn't knit that gauge with any other sport weight yarn, but I think there's a difference of, say, I could easily do 24 stitches over, you know, or I could do 6 stitches to the inch with like this Jameson and Smith yarn, which is technically fingering weight, but really also can function as a sport weight. Everything's right on that border. But I think something that I'm becoming more and more aware of is how much the construction of the yarn and the exact fiber content and things like that affect the gauge and affect the yarn weight, because something may be classified as, say, sport or DK, and really it's sort of on the border, and it may weigh less because of the type of fiber, and it may be plumper because of the construction. So this strand I would describe as very round, and it's very lively, very springy, but it's plump. It's very round, and like the way it feels on the needles is, to me, more like a DK weight, unless I truly do not understand what sport weight is. But you know, and so if you look up what these different weights of yarn are, basically when you are when a yarn is spun, its weight is classified according to the literal weight per yard. So you will see like a worsted weight where you get 230 yards per 100 grams, and then you will see a DK weight where you get like 260, sometimes, you know, as low as 260, but sometimes as high as like 300 and something yards per 100 grams. This one you get 146, I think, yards per 50 grams, 156. So you really are getting just over 300 yards per 100 grams with this. But because of how round and plump the strand is, and because of the, I think the whatever kind of, you know, sheep this is. So this is Portuguese wool. It's a very, very light fiber. So you're actually getting more yarn in there than what you'd expect based on that weight, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's like, the only thing I can compare it to is that I recently bought like a container of fennel seeds that were priced by the pound, and it was like $3 for like a bajillion fennel seeds, because it's like 0.3 of an ounce, but it's like more, it's like they didn't have a smaller container, so I bought the one that they had. But it's like, I don't even know what I'm gonna use that many for. I just wanted a spice jar's worth, but I got, you know, 80 million or whatever, because it weighs so little that what you get is a lot more than what you think you're gonna get. So all of that to say, I'm going down a size and sticking with a needle that feels comfortable and knitting this sweater. That was a lot of technical talk, but hey, that's exactly why I want to record more often, is to include more technical stuff. So this is a drop shoulder construction. You start by casting on the back, the whole width of the back, and then you're doing some short rows and some increases and some stuff, and then you knit it down, and then you cast on a little bit of, you know, the shoulder, like right shoulder, left shoulder. Yeah, this is my right, this, whatever, it's your left. And then you eventually join those, and then you will join in the round under the underarm, and then knit in the round from there. I've only done one sweater with that construction before, but it was really fun, and I'm really excited that I'm doing things with different kinds of construction. I find that what makes it really interesting to go from one sweater to another is just that it's constructed so differently, and trying out different things is just like really making me happy these days. So that is what I'm working on after that. So, oh, I should show you the other colors that are in this design. So there's this main color that's like a gray brown. There's this really deep blue that's almost black called denim. And what I find so fascinating is that when you put these colors together, this really dark blue seems lighter, and this really rusty orange color that is very like rusty and bronze, it does something, and it makes that also seem lighter in there. So you can kind of see that in the what's in there, right? Like it's a pretty low contrast. There's the front side. Anyways, yeah, it's a really beautiful color combo. It's a beautiful sweater. I'm excited to be making it, and we'll be making some modifications, such as making probably the sleeves a bit longer and making the overall body longer. There are two versions. There's a cropped and a standard length version, and I think both are too short for the way that the recipient likes things to fit. So, all right. I wanted to share a little bit of like 2022 in review and looking forward to 2023. I also want to share, before I forget to say it, that the Knit Blue 2022 Cal has ended. I will be drawing a prize or drawing a winner for a prize and then showing you the prize in the next episode. I don't have all the stuff handy right now because we moved and it's all still in a box somewhere in the basement. Not like in a creepy, gross, spidery corner of a basement, okay? Like, it's in my craft room. So I just need to put it all together, and then there were some, like, I wanted to get some like snack chocolate or something, you know, to include in there, so I haven't purchased that yet. So all right, so just, you know, stay tuned for that, but today's the day. It's over. I mean, it was really over at the end of 2022, but I will, you know, backdate from here. So let's talk about my last year in review and then 2023. So I knit 22 items last year and 3 partial items. I knit 3 pairs of mittens. They were all the Towie pattern by Susan Statz. I love it. I'm gonna make some more. I did 8.5 neckwear items. So I did the newsprint cowl, this Solverve shawl. I actually did 2 of these. I did the Luné, a shawl called Subtle Interruption that I knit for charity, and I want to make another one now for myself, and a Sophie shawl, plus an unpublished design of my own, which I will be publishing at a later date as part of a collection. I also cast on the Vertices Unite shawl, so I'm giving myself partial credit for that one. So that's 8.5 like neckwear items. I knit 5.5 pairs of socks. So 3 of them were for me, 2 were for my spouse, and 1 was for my mother-in-law. So I, use the patterns Luminary, Blueberry Waffles, Rias, and Morning Coffee socks. So, and then started but did not complete another pair. I made 2 hats. So I made the one I just showed you, and then I made the Mindy beanie, which I shared in my last episode. I did 4.5 sweaters and tops, which is I knit a Felix for my wife. I knit the Marble Mount pullover by Joji Locatelli. I finished the Rook sweater that I started in, I think, September-ish of 2021. I knit the Luma, and I started the Moonset tee, which I have set aside because it's a summer garment and I don't care about having it right now. I also knit some things that I ended up frogging. So I did the Moon Crush tank top. I'm really debating if I should restart that and just make the modifications that I want. I don't know. I, did some socks that I frogged. I'm probably gonna frog a couple more things that they've just been sitting around. But I'm really just amazed at how much I knit in the last year. Like 22 items, is a lot. So, and I think there might even be other stuff that I knit that I can't remember anymore, because I did not do what I did a real bad job at last year, was writing down what I was working on or taking any kind of notes or putting it on Ravelry. I was not on top of tracking my knitting last year, and it may just be that there were other things that happened that I don't even remember. But I, just assessing that and being like, okay, so I made a whole lot of things, and I know there are things in my near future knitting that, for instance, the 2 sweaters I'm working on that are not part of my 2023 plans that, well, let me back up. So in my last episode, I said my plans for 2023 is there are just 4 sweaters that I really want to knit this year. And I just want to share briefly why those 4 things. So 2 of them I already have the yarn for. 1 of them I have bought the yarn to swatch, and I'm just trying to figure out the exact layout of colors before I launch into it. And then the other one is one that I have almost bought the yarn for multiple times, but whatever vendor, every time I went to buy, the quantity I needed wasn't available. So I wanted, 8 skeins or whatever, and the store had 7. So this has happened to me with my local yarn store. It's happened with the Woolly Thistle. It's just a couple times. But this year at some point, I really aimed to get the yarn for that gale tunic and just knit it. And the reason that I really wanted to double down on these 4 in particular is because they're some of my very favorite designers. They're designs that have been in my queue for a while. And I find that my most successful patterns are the ones that I put in my queue. I know instantly I want to make them, but then I just kind of let it marinate for a while until I figure out exactly the color I want to use, exactly the yarn I want to use. I am not a person who goes and sees a pattern and says, okay, the designer used ABC yarn in XYZ color, let me get that, right? I have to think about it for a really long time. What color do I want? How do I want to, combine colors? So even with the Marie Wallen design I want to do, not only am I not using the yarn and the colors that were in her original version, I'm not going to use the color scheme that's in her revamped version, which she renamed. I don't like it. I know what colors I want to use. I'm just figuring out the layout of them. So there's a lot of thought that I find that I put into projects. The Rook sweater, it was a great example. I put that in my queue year 2 of being a knitter, and then it took me 4 years to figure out what yarn I wanted to knit it with. And then I cast it on at the right moment, right? So that one I wear quite a lot. I really love it. It's basically perfect. And I think that if I had rushed into, I have to knit this and I'm just going to use the yarn that's in the pattern and find a color that's I'm okay with, I don't think it would have been nearly as successful. So I'm trying to say, okay, here are 4 where I know exactly what colors I want to use. I've got it figured out. And I really want to lean into like knitting those things that I have figured out. You could put the Woodlands shawl in that category as well, because there was never any question of changing the yarn or the colors on that one. So it was from day one figured out. So yeah, I think I'm just going to try to really focus in on things where I have put a lot of thought into it already and like know what I want from it, because I have knit some things like the marble mount pullover that I loved the yarn and I loved the pattern. I loved the pattern on Hohi Locatelli. I don't love it on me. And I don't frankly love it on a lot of people that have knit it, unfortunately. I'm just trying to like focus in on what I know I can do successfully. And I think that will be a lot more satisfying for me than trying to do all these other things. And I will probably knit other things. I will definitely be knitting things other than those 4, but that's what I'm focusing on. Hope that all makes sense. All right, the last thing I want to share that is also kind of a 2023 plan is the Shelbey in the Book Club 23 nonfiction books challenge. So I listen to a lot of nonfiction books through the app Libby, which connects to my local library, and I can check books out and just listen to it while I'm knitting. I find that listening to audiobooks while I'm knitting is a really great way for me to reduce the amount of time that my eyes are looking at a screen, but also like being entertained while I'm reading. So I think this book challenge is awesome. I'm excited for it. And I thought I would just share some of the books that I'm planning to read. This is not all 23, and this list, of course, is subject to change. But I already started reading Prairie Fires. That is the story by a descendant of Laura Ingalls Wilder about kind of Laura and her daughter and how they were just like crazy libertarians, basically. It's all about their lives and the political stuff they got involved in, and how they were very different than how they portrayed themselves in the books. So, and they had a very contentious relationship, but they also managed to work together the whole time, even when they like hated each other's guts. It's a very weird book, and I feel like I know a lot that I never knew that I cared about. But I started it last year and I mostly listened to it this year, so I think it kind of counts. I just started the second nonfiction audiobook, so I'm reading now They Knew by Sarah Kendzior. I have loved all of her books. I mean, she has 2 others. They're great. I highly recommend them. Have some knitting or something cheerful around you when you listen to it, because there is some kind of hard truths in there. But yeah, there's a book called The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward E. Baptist that is sort of about, it is about the way that the slave trade and practice of plantation slavery built America's wealth, and how there is no kind of separating the American economy from that. So again, probably kind of a hard one to read, but it's on my list. Also, there's a memoir from Bono called Surrender, and I really want to read it. I am just old enough to remember when Bono was a cool person and not just associated with all the weird charity work that he did. So way back when, there was a band out of Ireland called U2, and they were these just working class guys who made cool music. And that is, to me, like the Bono that I know and love. And so I am a fan of U2. I think I'd be hard pressed to say that I'm like a very big fan. Their early work I enjoy quite a lot, like a lot. And then some of their later stuff I don't enjoy at all. So I'm very curious to read his memoir and to see how he talks about his transformation, in my mind, from being this sort of like average guy with musical talent, amazing songwriter, great singer, you know, being very rock and roll, and then becoming sort of this like person he's become. So that is on my to read list. I want to read The Year of Less by Kate Flanders. It is a book about a woman who spent a year only buying things that she could consume. So like food, gasoline, I don't know, probably a candle that she burned or whatever, you know, but like not buying stuff that, I'm just kind of curious about it. Because I have kind of like these two dueling parts of me. One side is a person who loves beauty and who loves things and who loves comfort. And then the other side is a person who is like, let's go be a hermit in the woods and like, you know, like anti-capitalism, you know, like let's reuse everything we possibly can. Let's never put a piece of plastic in the garbage. And then on the other hand, this person that's like, yeah, but you know, I just like this brand of coffee beans that comes in this bag or whatever, right? Like, so yeah, I'm super interested to read that. I recently bought a book at one of our local museums, the Charles Alice Museum, called Overground Railroad by Candace E. Taylor. And it is the story of how the Green Book came into being. So you're probably familiar with this, but if not, the Green Book was a travel guide for Black Americans during the period of Jim Crow. And then, you know, even beyond that, after that, when, you know, you can't take it for given that you're going to travel somewhere and find a hotel you can sleep in safely, that's clean and nice, and you know, find a restaurant that you can eat at and all of that. So it's sort of tied to a very special period of history where you know, automobiles and road trips were becoming a great American pastime, and also you know, how Black Americans found their way around the country safely. And I think that the Green Book is fascinating to me, not just because it's tied to this like period of history of just like, that was a huge change, right? Like automobile travel, but also there are still forms of the Green Book alive today. So one thing is like, I think about, I've consulted the website Purple Roofs, which is, you know, how do queer people travel and find safe accommodation? You know, I look very closely at the ratings on Airbnb. If I'm going to rent an Airbnb, I look very closely at the, you know, who has stayed there before, what did they have to say about it? Because I have had experiences as a traveler where, you know, my spouse and I show up and then people are like, oh, you're gay. Like, you know, and it's not like they've been cruel, and it's not like the same as, you know, segregation where it's like no gays allowed, but there is also just an element of personal safety. So this book I am so excited to read, and I actually bought the physical copy of this book, so it will be my physical, I guess it, you know, it won't be an audiobook, but most of these I'm probably going to do audiobook if I can. Another book I'm really excited about is Tricia Hersey's Rest is Resistance. So this is brand new. I think it just came out like last month, this month. I don't even know. But the last I heard it was pre-order, and then I saw she posted that like all these people are reading it now, so it must be out. Trisha Hersey is the creator of the Nap Ministry, and she, I think, is really underrated as a cultural force. I think that Beyonce's whole last album that she put out last year was like referencing this. I think tons of people are referencing this. I think the trend of quiet quitting, or, you know, people doing the bare minimum at work, is a reaction to this. I think, you know, COVID broke something loose and the world was ready to hear this message that she had. But it's also way deeper than the kind of like, you know, trend element that's happening in the world. So I'm really excited to read her book about rest and like a culture of rest, because I feel like a lot of things I'm reading, even like the Prairie Fires book, is getting me thinking about how much productivity and sort of this like Protestant work ethic and all of these things are really, really baked into our culture really, really deeply. This idea that we all ought to be working ourselves to the bone all the time. And, you know, phrases like idle hands are the devil's playground, or, you know, just like all of this stuff, right? About like not wasting time, not being lazy, and it's sort of like I'm just finding that like this is the zeitgeist right now, right? Is there's a real culture of like, what about just stopping and enjoying life? And like, how can you say that's a waste of time if it makes me feel better, if I'm refreshed, if I'm feeling whole and connected to myself? And you know, I think connecting back to some of the other books that I'm going to read, you know, I think the fact that you can't separate our country's wealth and economy, even today, from slavery, the actual forced labor of people, it's all like, to me, like everything's always connected, right? And I think even like I've been thinking about how like the cottagecore aesthetic is like this weird, like fake nostalgia replication of this idea of the like yeoman farmer and his like independent hard work. And it's all about hard work, right? And it's also like tied to, you know, Charles Ingalls being like, give me free land, I'm going to steal land from people. And then, you know, because I'm a hard worker, I get to like go out and cosplay being a farmer, but like I'm actually just like a failure at being a farmer, and I could just work a normal job and support my family, but I'm not going to, because I'd rather, you know, live out my fantasy of being a farmer. Like it's just like all of this stuff is connected. So I feel like reading Rest is Resistance is going to be like a big antidote to these other books, and also like it's going to be part of a conversation that's happening in my brain. Like it's going to be the response to these things, right? Which is nice, because sometimes I feel like you read nonfiction, you just get more questions and no answers. So finally, I am going to be reading Scenes from My Life by Michael K. Williams. So I hadn't read this, but I have seen Shelbey talk about this book and how it's like one of the best memoirs, and I've heard a lot of people say it's one of the best memoirs. So it has been my plan to read it, but I'm going to make it a goal to read it this year. That is not nearly 23 nonfiction books, but I'm sure that more stuff will come out that I will have to, you know, add to that list. So yeah, if you have any reading plans or knitting plans, I would love to hear about them. Just comment below and share them with me. If you have any kind of making plans or any plans, if you have plans to rest this year, I would love to hear like what those are. Like, are you scheduling in nap time? Are you, you know, like just how are you gonna make that happen? So yeah, share below. And it's been great chatting with you, and have a great week, and I'll see you back in 2 weeks. Bye.